because it affects your eardrums or something. And a Dutch pilot, Eric von Hazelhoff, his navigator had a code. And we had an all-out effort, therefore I had to team up with Eric. Eric von Hazelhoff was Holland's #1 war hero in World War II. A film has been made about his life called Soldier of Orange. Orange is a royal house in Holland, the House of Orange. And Eric and I became very friendly. He married an English girl. I was best man at his wedding. And I went to Holland twice after the war, stayed with Eric. There was a clip in Newsweek, American magazine Newsweek, which showed Eric on his motorbike. When the Germans invaded Holland, Eric was at a university party, heard the news on the radio, jumped on his motorbike in white tie and tails, and rushed to the recruiting office and joined the Dutch army that night. He subsequently got the equivalent of the Dutch Victoria Cross and the equivalent of the Dutch Military Cross. He then escaped from the Germans and went over to England and joined the Royal Air Force and was on our squadron. I didn't remember how many times I had flown with Eric, but Eric has written 2 books. One was Soldier of Orange, which has been filmed. It was shown in Trinidad, because I took a couple of friends. It was a deluxe cinema. And I took my daughter. 1948, I said goodbye to Eric in The Hague. That's where he lived. And he said to me, Ulric, you want to get me anytime, just write Eric Hazelhoff, the Netherlands. It'll get to me. And I, with equal youthful arrogance, said, this is 1948. Eric, you want to get in touch with me? Write Ulric Cross, Trinidad. Not realizing that there's a town called Trinidad in every single Spanish country in the Caribbean and South America and Central America. This is a very interesting digression, because we said goodbye in 1948. We never saw each other again until 56 years later, when I took my daughter I told her about Eric, and I took her to meet Eric in 2004, 56 years later. And I was met not by Eric. Eric was living in Hawaii at the time, but the Queen of the Netherlands had invited him to start a vintage car race in Utrecht for Red Cross funds. Eric went back to Holland as the Queen's ADC after the war, because he got 2 DFCs on our squadron, I need hardly mention. And when I went to stay with Eric in 1948, I was then doing something for the BBC on the starting up of airlines after the war. And I went to see BOAC, or British South American Airways, KLM. And the KLM man in London told me, well, you can't write anything about the KLM unless you go to Amsterdam. And said, you better go there. I better arrange for you to see Dr. Slotemaker, who was the vice president of KLM at the time. So I went, met Dr. Slotemaker, stayed with Eric, and I also met a Dutch navigator who was also in my squadron. They had been shot down, they were very badly shot up over Berlin. And in those days, you got badly shot up over Berlin, whether you were German or anything. You went to Sweden, which was neutral. And the Swedes put you in jail, or let you off. You had to give your word of honor that you would not try to escape. And eventually, they would send an equal number of Germans and an equal number of R.A.F. back to continue the war. And this chap, what was his name? Ben Vlielander Hein, He was a very rich young man by 1948. He had been a navigator on my squadron. And Eric gave me his telephone number. I rang Ben, and he said, yes, come and have dinner one night. So I went to a splendid bijou residence in the middle of Amsterdam. The door was opened by his butler, who ushered me in. Ben was the one person who attempted to escape from Sweden. He and his pilot had been very badly shot up and they had to land in Sweden. And Ben was a very high-spirited young man. And I was amazed. I gathered later from Eric that Ben was married 4 times, had to pay alimony to 4 wives, so he escaped to live in France. But that is just a digression, an after-the-war digression. But I took my daughter to meet Eric, and Eric's wife came, met me, and Eric sat in the car. Oh no, the KLM people ushered me to the VIP suite at Schiphol, and Eric's wife came and met me there and took me to the car where Eric was sitting. But on the way to the car, she said, Ulric, I want to ask you one question. Eric has told me a story, and I cannot believe it's true. Is it true? Tell me. I said, I know exactly what you're asking. When Eric and I said goodbye, and I told you, he said, just write, Eric has off the Netherlands, and I said, yes, just write Ulric Cross Trinidad. Eric wrote me a letter. The return address on the back of the envelope was the Lambs Club, New York. Eric was in New York at the time. And he wrote Ulric Cross Trinidad. The Trinidad Post Office, I was working in Africa at the time. The Trinidad Post Office wrote addressee unknown and returned it to the return address on the back of the envelope, the Lambs Club, New York. Eric crossed out addressee unknown and wrote under it, try harder man, and put it back in the post. It arrived at my desk. I was then chairman of the industrial court in Tanzania. And it arrived on my desk in Tanzania. The Trinidad Post Office tried harder. And his wife said, look at that story too. I said, absolutely true. Anyway, so I took my daughter to meet Eric in 2004. And she was reading his second book on his way to meeting. Second book was called In Pursuit of Life. That's right. And Eric was incredible. I don't know about being the bravest man, the craziest man I ever met. And I will come on to doing more operations. I did 80 operations altogether. Now the R.A.F had a system. When you'd done 30, that was a tour. And at 30, you're entitled to say, okay, I've had enough, I want to rest. My pilot did that. He consulted, we had a chat. And I said, well, what do you do when you go on rest? He said, well, you probably teach navigation. I said, I didn't come all the way from Trinidad to teach. I could teach in Trinidad. So I went to the CEO, and Roy, my pilot, said, he was English. He said, we had 7 nasty incidents in our first tour. But 30, you can say, I've had enough, I want to rest, I will come back. At 50, you can do the same thing. I want to rest, I'll come back if I feel like it, but I'll come back. When I had done 50, my CEO, I had done 30, my pilot left, and I got another pilot. My CEO said, you want to stay on? Your pilot's going. I said, yeah, I'll stay on. He said, okay, because 2 days ago, I got a posting for you. I said, doing what? He said, teaching navigation. And I said, I really didn't want to teach. Not that I have anything against teaching, I said, but I don't think I was cut out to be a teacher. He said, okay, I can get the posting cancelled, which he did. I got another pilot and I went. On the 5th day, he called me, my CO called me and said, you've been posted to a Met flight. You've done 5th day. I said, but I don't really want to go. A Met flight? What does that entail? He said, well, what you do, you fly around England, looking at cloud formations, taking temperatures, you let the Met know, and they forecast what the weather is going to be like over Germany that night. I'm sure it's an extremely useful thing, but it sounded a bit boring to me. So I said, well, I don't really want to go. And my pilot said, well, 5th day, I'm going. But I had an experience. I met a chap called Peter Wright on my squadron, also a navigator. He was the man who taught me how to do the London Times crossword, which I have, by the way, won their competition on 2 occasions. And he saw me doing the Telegraph crossword in the mess one night, and he said, why are you doing the Telegraph crossword? Why don't you do the Times? I said, what? Times crossword? No way. He said, what did you do at school? I said, Latin, Greek, French, Spanish. He said, did you do much Shakespeare? I said, well, we did 4 Shakespeare plays. I think Julius Caesar, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, and what else did I can't remember. And he said, well, how many times you do a lot of, I said, I've read everything that Shakespeare has ever written at least 3 times. That's my bedside book. It's complete works, 2 bedside books I have. Complete works of William Shakespeare and complete works of Oscar Wilde. He said, well, you can do the Times crossword. I said, maybe you should show me. He said, well, there are certain conventions in the Times crossword, and we discussed it. And I did the Times crossword. I started doing the Times crossword. As I say, I won their competition twice. Once in 1992 and once in 1998. I cheated in the 1998 one. When I say I cheated, I use a bit of psychology. I was in Paris at the time for the World Cup, which France won the World Cup in 1998. I had done the Times crossword. First thing I did in the morning was to go out to a kiosk at the bottom of the road where I lived to buy the London Times so I can do the crossword. And a friend of mine was going to England from Paris and said, do you want me to post it for you in London? I said, no, no, no. France had issued a special stamp for winning the World Cup. And it was a very attractive, a sensational looking stamp. So I said, no, I want a French stamp on the envelope. Because this man is seeing who's picking out these things. He's seeing all sorts of stamps, nearly all with the Queen's head on it. And he's bound to open this one first. And he did. That's the second time I won it was obviously one that was opened first. And that's how I won the Times crossword competition the second time. Third occasion, unfortunately, I got into the semi-final. They have a national crossword every year. I got into the semi-finals in England. I was Trinidad and Tobago's High Commissioner in London at the time. And I got to the semi-final. I had just gone to London as High Commissioner, and the semi-finals of the national crossword competition was to be held at the Park Lane Hilton on a certain day, and that day I was presenting my credentials, I think one of the Scandinavian countries. So I could not go, so I lost out. I don't say I would have won the national crossword competition, but I couldn't even go to it. Now, as that one digression of coincidences, when the new arrivals in London as heads of mission every November are invited by Mercedes-Benz for 3 days to Stuttgart, where their headquarters are. They never attempt to sell you anything. They give you no brochures, nothing. It is just a goodwill gesture. New arrival in London, we will take you to the proving ground, drive you around, and anybody who wants to be driven around the circuit again, and they warn you, the driver will do the circuit with his hands in his lap, not on the steering wheel. I was the only person who volunteered to do that. And I did it, and he did it. And they never attempt to sell you anything. It's the softest sell you can ever imagine. But you spend 3 days in the countryside in Germany and you motor into Stuttgart. Now the chap who was in charge of us was bilingual in French and in German and English. And after 3 days, I was beginning to feel withdrawal symptoms because I hadn't done a crossword for 3 days. So we got to Stuttgart airport, and I rushed in to buy the Times, and he rushed in to buy the Telegraph. So I said, why are you buying the Times? He said, well, I do the crossword every day. I said, oh, well, I do the Times. Why don't you do the Times? And I told him how I started doing the Times. And I said, well, you know, it was a chap on my squadron, a navigator, who had been classics master at rugby school before the war. I don't know what happened to him after the war, but I never saw him again. But he had a wooden leg. And that is the man who persuaded me to do 80 operations without a rest. He said, oh, why did he persuade? I said, that man was very badly shot up. In his first tour, he'd done about 28, I think, had a leg amputated, came back to do a second tour with a wooden leg. And I don't know what happened to him, but I decided that I don't have enough guts to do that. I said, when I come off operational flying, I am not coming back. I believe I owe the R.A.F 3 tours. I work it out at 80. I will do 80 and come up, and I am not coming back on operational flying again. I said, I don't have the guts to have my leg shot off, have a wooden leg, and then come back to do a second tour. I don't think I could. And he said to me, he said he had a wooden leg. Yes. He said, what was his name? He asked me. His name was Peter Wright. I don't know what happened to him after the war. I told him. He said, I was educated at rugby school. He was my classics master at rugby after the war. Right. I said, that's the man who taught me to do. And month before last, I was in England for Pathfinder Day, and I was asked to sign my name on the door of the mosquito which is being done up, because there's a new mosquito in England now which flies. And they said, would you sign your name on the door? And I looked, and the first name I saw was Peter Wright. And that was just last month. The other one was a chap called Joe Patience. He was also in my squadron. I saw him at Pathfinder Forces. Joe Patient was the only person on my squadron who was at Pathfinder Day on a Sunday in August, the middle of August. And my squadron commander, Group Captain Wormsley, was not. He didn't come last year, didn't come this year. I met him the year before when he was 96. And he told me, oh, look, I don't think I can make next year, you know. He was in a wheelchair. I said, why are you in a wheelchair? He said, well, I'm in a wheelchair because I am 96 years of age. And I have 2 new knees, both made of steel, and this one is 18 months older than this one. He didn't come last year and sent me another message this year. I'm in an old people's home. I am now 98. Just 2 weeks before I left, the only other one who was on my squadron was a chap called Tommy Broom. Tommy is the only person I know in the R.A.F who had 3 DFCs. And we don't understand why he had 3 DFCs. You know, you get one, maybe you do something, you get another one. And we could none of us could understand. We talked about this. Why did they give him a DSO, which is a higher medal than a DFC? We don't know. They gave him a 3rd DFC. He has written his autobiography, which I have, And my son-in-law took a picture of Tommy Broom and myself. And I have one memory of Tommy Broom standing at the bar in the officers' mess with a pint of beer in his hand. And that's all I remember of Tommy Broom. And when I saw him year before last, he was in a wheelchair too. And he said, push me to I was talking to him, he said, push me to my seat. I said, where are you sitting? He said, oh, over there. And he said, push me. And there was already a pint of beer on his place. Tommy died 2 months ago. My son-in-law took a picture of us last year, and we said, see you next year. And my son-in-law sent a picture of Tommy Broom and his pilot. He was a navigator. And his pilot, also named Broom, and I always thought they were brothers. This pilot was, oh God, he stayed on in the R.A.F. After the war. He became an air marshal, Ivor Broom. He came to my 80th birthday party 13 years ago. Ivor came. Tommy didn't come, but Ivor came. And it's only last year I realized that they were not brothers. Until we were never brothers. One was a pilot, one was a navigator, and they were known as the Flying Broomsticks. Tommy, they did one more trip to Berlin than I did. They did 22 Berlin trips. I only did 21. And they were fantastic. Unfortunately, Ivor died a couple of years ago. And Tommy died 3 months ago because my son-in-law cut out the obituary of the two Brooms from the London Times and sent it to me. So the only person I met who was on my squadron was Joe Patient. Joe Patient is 93 too. And it's the first time I'd seen him at the Pathfinder Day, Sunday. And he said, Ulric, what are you doing? I said, well, as little as possible. I'm 93. He said, well, I'm 93 too. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I am planning, I have a favorite charity. And I'm planning round about the end of October. I'm trying to collect £5,000 for my charity. And people are sponsoring me. I said, sponsoring you to do what? I am doing a skydive at the end of October at 93. I said, I take my hat off to you, Joe. I'm not about to do a skydive. Now, I want to come to perhaps two of my 80. I can't remember all 80. 80 is 80, is a lot. I was posted, as I told you, after 50. And I didn't want to go. And a young New Zealander pilot, he was not my pilot, but we were friendly, and he was also posted because he'd done 50. And our CO said, sorry, I can't stop this posting. You'd have to go and see old Hamish at Pathfinder Force headquarters and see if you can talk him out of, into cancelling your postings. He said, I'll give you a car and a driver, and you can go and see Hamish Mahadi. So, Joe, what's his name? Jack Hay was his name. Jack Hay and I went in, and we argued with Hamish and argued. And Hamish said, look, you've done 50. The R.A.F thinks it's enough. Why don't you think it's enough? Fly around looking at clouds and taking temperatures. And eventually, Hamish Mahadi said, okay, you want to kill yourself? Go ahead. I'll cancel the posting. Jack was shot down and killed on his 51st trip. But that's the look of the door. I remember two operations which were worthy of note. One was bombing workshops at the main railway station in a town in France called Nantes. And why I remember it, that one particularly, because nothing happened. We took off from our station, had to bomb, And then we landed because we didn't have enough petrol to take us back to our own station, the route we were given. So we landed at a place in Wales called an R.A.F station called Pembroke Dock. And nothing happened. Nobody ever shot at us. It was more or less daylight, so there were no searchlights to cone you. And there was nothing. Nothing happened. Not a gunshot was fired. Oh, by the way, we had no guns. Huh? Our mosquitoes, we had no armament at all. We only had bombs. We had no guns. We depended on speed to get away. And we landed at Pembroke Dock to refuel, spend the night, and then go back to our own station the next day. Walked into the officers' mess, and I saw a plaque. And the plaque was AC2 Shaw, and in brackets, Lawrence of Arabia was stationed here. And I met an elderly gentleman who had been there at the time of Lawrence of Arabia. Now, I don't know if you know the history of Lawrence of Arabia, the man who more or less created the Middle East. Lawrence of Arabia was a colonel in the British Army, and he was the expert on the Middle East. When he retired from the army, he joined the Royal Air Force at the lowest possible rank, aircraftman second class. And he rode his motorcycle around. He was stationed at Pembroke Dock. Now, what was interesting, I thought it interesting, he was never an officer in the Royal Air Force. He was in the airman's mess in the Royal Air Force, aircraftman Shaw, but the plaque to him is in the officer's mess, which I don't understand. And I met a gentleman there, an R.A.F officer, who told me he was stationed there at the same time as Lawrence of Arabia. And it used to be very funny. The station commander would get a message from London. The Prime Minister wants to see aircraftman Shaw. Will you send him up to London by such and such a day, on such and such a day and such a time? Or the foreign minister wants to see aircraftman Shaw in London tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. And then he told me, he said it was very serious. You'd have to go to the airman's mess to find aircraftman Shaw, but the plaque is in the officer's mess. He was never an officer in the Royal Air Force. That is one of the interesting digressions I have about that flight to Nantes. The other one, of course, was a rather more exciting one. We were very badly shot up over Berlin and lost an engine. And we were bombing, I think, or flaring from 25,000 feet. And there was a lot of flak. We were coned in searchlights, and we got out of that. And the pilot said, look, I'm going to have to feather this engine. So he feathered the engine, you stop the propellers spinning around, which creates a lot of drag. So you feather the engine. And he said, and I cannot maintain 25,000 feet on one engine. I'm going to come down to 7,000 feet. And we're going to have to look out for fighters. Flying at 7,000 feet from Berlin back to England was not particularly healthy at night. And 7,000 feet you could be picked up by the radar, and we cannot maintain speed, we cannot maintain height. And the pilot said, give me a course to the nearest aerodrome in England. We can't go back to our own aerodrome. So I worked out a course for Sqdn Morley. Now we have to preserve radio silence. We cannot tell Sqdn Morley we're coming, because the Germans would pick it up, and that would be the end of us. And so I worked out a course to Sqdn Morley, and we cannot tell Sqdn Morley we are coming. We get to Sqdn Morley, there is no flare path. This is 2 o'clock in the morning. There is no flare path, and we can't tell them we're coming, but they could hear. We have something called IFF, Identification Friend or Foe, and it's a signal you emanate. So when they hear the aircraft, they can pick up whether it's a friend or a foe. So they don't have time to put on the flare path. So the pilot said, look, we're not doing a circuit, and then normally you do a circuit and then go into land. And he said, I'm going straight in. It was a bit of a moon, something like the moon tonight, a little bit of a moon. And so he went straight in, landed too far down the runway, and burst through the hedge at the end of the runway and into a disused quarry just beyond the runway. Now the Mosquito is a plywood aircraft. It's made of wood. Only the engines are metal. The rest of the aircraft is made of wood, plywood. And we didn't know it was a disused quarry. All we knew is that we fell into a bottomless pit. And by which time, of course, they realized with the friends who beneath that